Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Crystal Perry. Crystal Perry had been born on August 23, 1963, in Rumford, Maine, the youngest of 10 children. Her parents had faced significant difficulties providing for their large family, leading Crystal and her siblings to grow up independent. Crystal and her siblings had always wanted to build their own lives as soon as possible. They eventually moved to different cities and states in search of new opportunities. Crystal had met her future husband Tom in high school. Crystal and Tom married and initially moved to California, but Crystal soon discovered that life in the city was not right for her. After a year and a half, they decided to return to Maine, settling in the small town of Bridgeton, about an hour from Crystal's hometown of Rumford. Crystal found a job at a local shoe store, while Tom worked various odd jobs. Crystal and Tom's lives took a new turn when Crystal became pregnant and they welcomed daughter Sarah. Although Tom was initially excited to become a father, Sarah's arrival complicated Tom's relationship with Crystal. Tom began spending more and more time at a local bar, spending almost all of their limited income on alcohol. One time, he even took the money Crystal had saved to buy alcohol, leaving them with almost nothing. As Tom's drinking habits worsened, the family did not have enough money for basic needs, including food. Finally, Crystal decided to file for divorce. After the divorce, Tom occasionally saw Sarah, but he was largely absent from her life. The situation got worse when Tom got a new girlfriend and she started harassing Crystal. This girlfriend would call Crystal, make threats, come to her house, and cause provocations, all because she was upset with Crystal's past relationship with Tom. Crystal's fears for Sarah's safety grew and she became hesitant to let her daughter visit Tom, worried that Tom's new girlfriend might actually harm Sarah. Crystal moved in with her mother and worked hard to save enough money to buy her own house. After years of saving, she bought a small house near a peaceful lake on the outskirts of Bridgeton. Crystal was excited to provide a stable and loving environment for her daughter, Sarah. Crystal prioritized giving Sarah the attention and love she deserved. In their free time, Crystal and Sarah enjoyed spending quality time together, often watching movies or chatting with each other. One day was like any other day. Crystal went to work, and Sarah went to school. They had their usual dinner together, and Crystal carried Sarah to bed. However, a few hours later, Sarah's peaceful night was broken by a loud scream that startled her. At first, she thought Crystal was arguing on the phone, but it quickly became clear that there was something much more serious going on with Crystal. Crystal had been screaming loudly in the kitchen, causing Sarah to fear that her mother was being attacked. The bedroom door had been slightly open, but the kitchen was out of sight. Stiff with fear, Sarah could not move or make a sound. As she listened, she heard footsteps approaching, making her think that the next attacker would come for her. Feeling scared, she quickly hid behind the bed. However, the footsteps stopped, and Sarah heard the sound of a kitchen drawer opening, followed by the clatter of someone rummaging through utensils. Crystal's screams continued, filled with pleas for mercy, until she was stabbed. With each stab, Crystal's voice grew weaker. Sarah realized she could do nothing and would likely be killed as well. After her mother's screams stopped, she left the room and went into the kitchen, where she witnessed a terrible scene. Her mother lay in a large pool of blood covering the floor. Confused, Sarah asked her neighbors for help and eventually found an Italian restaurant whose owner lived in an adjacent building. They opened the door for Sarah and called 911 to report the incident. The officers immediately went to their home. Upon arrival, officers witnessed a gruesome scene. The kitchen was covered in blood, including the floors, walls, and kitchen appliances. Crystal had died, and medical experts determined that Crystal had lost too much blood. Police found a handprint on the front door glass, possibly Sarah's. No other fingerprints were found, but there were many bloody shoe prints on the kitchen floor. Investigators took photos to determine the shoe size and model, assuming they belonged to the killer. A trail of blood led to Sarah's bedroom but suddenly stopped as if the killer had changed his mind. One particular detail caught the detective's attention. The killer had tried to wipe away some blood on the floor. With the blood stains spreading, this effort seemed futile. Further investigation revealed that some of the drops of blood on the floor were irregularly shaped, suggesting they had fallen from the knife. This led investigators to believe that drops of blood might have flown out of the knife during the attack. Investigations showed that, in addition to the initial drops of blood, other drops of blood on the floor appeared to have fallen at a 90-degree angle, suggesting they originated from a higher point. Detectives suspected these drops might belong to the perpetrator, who might have been injured during the crime. Further supporting this theory, the trail of blood drops led directly to a roll of tissue. This showed that the perpetrator used a tissue to stop the bleeding before hastily leaving the scene. Autopsy results showed that Crystal's body had suffered more than 50 stab wounds. The murder weapon, possibly a kitchen knife, was not found at the crime scene, suggesting the perpetrator might have brought it with him. An important detail revealed that the force used was so great that part of the knife broke and was stuck in Crystal's body. The investigation also found evidence of a previous sexual assault. As a result, medical experts were able to collect and analyze the perpetrator's semen along with the blood samples obtained, sending both for further laboratory testing. However, there was a problem. The local DNA laboratory was severely understaffed due to funding problems, leading to a significant backlog. As a result, detectives had to begin the investigation without forensic evidence, which would take at least 6 months to process. The investigation began by ruling out robbery as a motive because nothing was missing from the house. Furthermore, there were no signs of forced entry, so the police suspected that the victim had arbitrarily opened the door to let the perpetrator in. Since she was wearing pajamas, it was unlikely that she was expecting visitors. Detectives came up with 2 theories. Either the victim knew her killer, or someone she didn't know knocked on her door and convinced her to let them in under false pretenses. To pursue this lead, detectives turned their attention to the only witness, Sarah, who was undergoing a medical examination at the hospital. The police began questioning Sarah about the killer, and she explained that she had stayed in the bedroom until the incident was over. However, the police were a bit skeptical about her story. They asked her how she knew her mother had been attacked with a knife, and Sarah replied that it was obvious. Despite her reaction, detectives continued to pressure her, suspecting that she might have been withholding information and might have seen the perpetrator. During the first 3 days after the murder, police questioned Sarah 18 times in the hope that her story would change. However, she always maintained that everything happened as she initially described. Meanwhile, detectives pursued other leads and achieved their first breakthrough. They discovered a pair of boots at a local shoe store whose sole pattern resembled bloody footprints found at the crime scene. Additionally, they learned that Crystal had been harassed by Teresa, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend. Despite evidence that the killer was a man, the police decided to investigate Teresa, considering her history of threatening to kill Crystal. Maybe Teresa had found an accomplice to commit the crime. However, detectives found no evidence to support this theory. Further investigation revealed that Crystal was in a relationship with a man named Dennis at the time of her death. The two had met 2 years ago when Dennis started working at the shoe store. Dennis and Crystal began dating, and Dennis eventually proposed to her. Although Crystal accepted, they never married. Their relationship was tense, with frequent arguments and Dennis engaging in aggressive behavior, such as breaking objects and banging on walls. However, there was no evidence that he ever physically harmed Crystal. The day after Crystal's murder, detectives visited Dennis at his home. When they asked if he had left the house the night before or if he had seen Crystal, Dennis immediately asked if she was dead and then fainted. After regaining consciousness, he answered the detective's questions. Dennis explained that he had planned to visit Crystal that evening but was delayed because he was helping a friend fix his car. When he later called Crystal, she said it was too late, leading to an argument and Dennis staying home. Police were able to verify Dennis' alibi, confirming that he had helped his friend that evening. Dennis also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of deception, except when asked if he felt responsible for Crystal's death. He replied no, but the test detected his tremors. Additionally, detectives discovered that Dennis had the same shoe size as the killer, but no matching shoes were found in his house. Dennis agreed to provide a DNA sample but made a special request. Dennis had made a special request to the detectives. If they decided to arrest him, he had asked them to enter his workplace through the back door, instead of the main entrance. He had explained that he did not want to disrupt the work environment or make noise in front of his colleagues because his boss had always treated him kindly. However, because he had continued to claim innocence, this request had raised suspicions. The police investigation had led to another important discovery. They had contacted Crystal's best friend, who lived in another town, and she had revealed that Crystal had confided in her just weeks before the murder. Crystal had expressed her fear towards Dennis, saying their arguments had escalated and had become more and more heated. Dennis' behavior had also become more and more aggressive, causing Crystal to consider ending their relationship. However, she had hesitated to do so because she was afraid of his reaction. Detectives had also interviewed one of Crystal's co-workers, but she had not provided any useful information during their conversation. However, as soon as the police had left, Dennis had gone to the person's workplace and had begun asking about her conversation with the detectives. The police investigation had continued despite the lack of evidence against the initial suspect, as DNA test results would have taken several months to process. Meanwhile, they had pursued other leads. A strange tip had led them to a local man named Donnie, who had allegedly bragged about killing Crystal while drunk at a party. However, when questioned, Donnie had claimed to have no memory of the party and had denied any involvement in the murder. The police investigation into Crystal's murder had had difficulty finding any concrete clues. In an effort to uncover new information, Crystal's family had offered a $10,000 reward and had distributed flyers around town. However, Teresa, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend, had been seen repeatedly tearing up these flyers, raising suspicions. The ex-husband, Tom, had been thoroughly investigated but had eventually been ruled out as a suspect due to his severe alcoholism. His heavy daily drinking had made it unlikely he would commit a crime, and he had had no clear motive. Police had also investigated two other men Crystal had dated after her divorce but had found no evidence linking them to the crime. All three men, including Tom, had provided DNA samples to be sent to a laboratory for analysis. 9 months after the murder, the lab results had finally come in, but they hadn't matched any of the suspects, including Dennis. This had left detectives with no new leads. They had asked to take Dennis's DNA sample again for further testing, but the results had still been the same. The investigation into Crystal's murder had hit a dead end, causing detectives to reinvestigate their only witness, Sarah. They had suspected that Sarah might be hiding information or that a traumatic experience had caused her to repress memories of the killer. To question her further, police had gone to Texas, where Sarah was living with her aunt. A polygraph test had been administered to Sarah, but the results hadn't shown any deception. Despite this, investigators had continued to question her for days, asking the same questions over and over again. However, Sarah had always maintained that she had not seen the killer. The case had remained unsolved for several years. Police had continued to interview potential suspects and follow up on leads. But to no avail. The breakthrough had come in the late 1990s with the introduction of the FBI's DNA database. Investigators had uploaded the killer's DNA sample, but unfortunately, no matches had been found. The detective asked Sarah to work with a psychologist to try to recall any repressed memories of the crime. Even though Sarah agreed, the psychologist ultimately concluded that she really didn't remember anything and was telling the truth about not seeing the killer. The case remained unsolved for many years. Detectives continued to investigate but found no new leads. This changed in 2006 when a surprising development occurred. A DNA sample was entered into the FBI database and it matched blood and semen left at the crime scene where Crystal was killed. The DNA belonged to a man named Michael Hutchinson, who was never suspected in the case. Detectives discovered that in 2003, Hutchinson was arrested for assault and threatening with a weapon, resulting in a sentence of 6 months in prison and 3 years of probation. During his arrest, a DNA sample was collected, but it was not uploaded to the FBI database at the time. It was instead stored in a laboratory. 3 years after the initial DNA sample was taken, Michael was arrested for drunk driving with his children. He was released on bail but failed to appear in court, leading to jail time. Ironically, Michael was arrested on the day of the wedding and put in a prison cell. His DNA sample was retrieved and quickly uploaded to the database. The detective contacted Sarah, informing her of the development, but asked her to keep the information confidential until formal charges were filed. When asked if she knew the suspect, Sarah replied that she did not. Given that Michael was already in custody, the detective carefully built the case to prevent any possibility of him evading punishment. Further investigation revealed that at the time of the murder, Michael lived in Bridgeton, just 2 miles from Crystal's residence. When he was 19, Michael lived near the Italian restaurant where Sarah called the police. He regularly drove to his mother's house, which was just a short distance from Crystal's, meaning he often passed by her residence. The detective discovered that Michael could have easily encountered Crystal multiple times before the murder. When questioned in prison, Michael insisted he was not involved in Crystal's murder and denied knowing her, despite the presence of his semen and blood on her body at the crime scene. The detective found his denial unconvincing. During the visit to the prison, the detective observed the noticeable scar on Michael's palm. This was very significant because it was likely that Crystal's killer injured his hand during the crime. While this alone would not have been enough evidence in court, combined with DNA evidence, it contributed to Michael's eventual murder charge. According to the prosecution, Michael, an illegal drug user, saw Crystal as he passed her house on the night of the murder. He decided to assault her, leading to her death. While Michael refused to confess, the available evidence clearly showed that he was responsible for the assault and murder of Crystal. During the trial, an explanation was found for the murderer's lack of fingerprints at the crime scene. It turned out that Michael's job as a bricklayer was the reason. Over time, the constant wear and tear on his hands had erased the patterns on his palms, making it impossible for him to leave fingerprints. Michael presented testimony about his timeline to defend himself. He claimed he had met Crystal at a bar and they had returned to her place to have consensual sex. However, his story became suspicious when he described a strange man wearing a black motorcycle jacket breaking into the house, knocking him unconscious, and killing Crystal. When Michael regained consciousness, he allegedly tried to fight off the attacker but had injured his hand. The attacker then fled, and Michael also left the crime scene without a reasonable explanation. Michael's story was very unconvincing. The investigation revealed that the only shoe prints at the scene had belonged to Michael. If his story was true, the intruder would have had to take off his shoes before entering the house, which still wouldn't have explained the lack of other marks on the floor. Furthermore, no witnesses had come forward to confirm that Crystal had been at the bar with Michael. The trial ended on April 9, 2007, with Michael being unanimously found guilty. As a result, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole and remained incarcerated. Sarah's life was deeply affected by her mother's death, but she found the strength to move forward with time. She pursued further education, became a writer, and wrote a book about her mother's murder.